Hey everybody, Jay Widener here. I'm back reading my book, A Monument to the End of Time, and we are now on uh, a new part 3. This part is called Fulcanelli and the Great Cross. And this is section 1, the grand hermetic theme and the green language. That spring morning, as we sat in front of the monument at Henday, we decided to follow Fulcanelli's trail wherever it might lead. A single reference in the double anonymous Henday chapter of Fulcanelli's Mystery of the Cathedrals had led us to the Gnostic origins of alchemy and its deep but covert connections to the apocalyptic doctrine of Chaleism. Following the fingerprints of the secret led us into many mystical traditions of all the Abrahamic offshoots, Muslim, Christian, and Jewish. We saw how these traditions fragmented and went underground until just 1,000 years ago, they were rediscovered by the West, by Pope Sylvester II and the chroniclers of Mount Zion. These discoveries reanimated the West, providing a motive for the Crusades and the great heretical movements. One of these movements was the spread of a gospel of light in the form of the Lux Continua style of church building, initiated by Abbe Suger at St. Denis. In ways that are not clear, both the Order of Sion and the Knights of the Temple were involved in this new cathedral building movement. By the time our research reached this point, we felt that we had answered most of our main questions. Is Fulcanelli telling the truth? Is there any connection in history or tradition between alchemy and such Gnostic eschatologies as Chaleism? And if there is a connection, how has it been maintained through the centuries? Is the secret really displayed on the walls of certain Gothic cathedrals? To answer that last question, we needed proof that Fulcanelli, Zion, or the Templars and the cathedral builders all knew about the secret of ancient illuminated astronomy, the wisdom of Abraham, and how the alignment of the dragon axis foretold the quality of time. Without that secret piece of evidence, we couldn't be sure that we had the same mystery. Fortunately, Fulcanelli virtually thrust the answer in our face. Part 6 of his Paris chapter is entirely devoted to one image, the dragon and the plinth of Saint Marcel on the middle pillar of the porch of Saint Anne. Fulcanelli informs us that it describes the shortest practice of our science, and among lessons in stone, it therefore deserves a pride of place, unquote. This short or dry path, in contrast to the longer moist method, is done with, quote, one single vessel, one single matter, one single furnace, unquote, and it can be accomplished in days rather than months or years. The hermetic emblem of this method, Fulcanelli assures us, can be found on the dragon and its pillar. When we turn to Fulcanelli's description of the markings on the dragon, we can recognize them immediately from our previous research in chapter 4 of part 2. He notes a line between the spine of the dragon, defining the ecliptic axis from Draco to the Lesser Magellanic Cloud, and then 2 lines on the wings, tilted to show the obliquity of the Earth's wobble, which defines the axis of the galactic dragon from center to edge, and then 2 more circles on the tail to show the cycle's interconnection. Saint Marcel's dragon is therefore none other than the grand Leviathan of heaven, the triple dragon axis from which the cube of space is formed. Before I go on here, I'm going to show you, this is the cube of space from our book. Cube has 12 edges to it. Each edge is a zodiacal sign. You can see the pole linking to the 2. So that is how you tell your place in time. So if you're a planet and you're sitting in the center of that cube, you can it's like having an address, a celestial address. Not only that, but Fulcanelli also describes the decoration on the plinth in terms of the tree of life. 3 principles and 2 natures join with the 5 unities, all Fulcanelli's terms, to form a whole on each side of the plinth. This total of 10 is significant, quote, in which everything finishes and comes to an end, unquote, as Fulcanelli reminds us with a quote from the Zephyr Yeserat. Since the plinth is 4-sided, then 3 other trees are implied, suggesting the projected tree on the celestial sphere of the Bahir. Therefore, in this one symbol, Fulcanelli presents us with a capsule summary of the important points of the ancient illuminated astronomy. Since the Templars are known to have been involved in financing the construction of the Porch of St. Anne, we might expect that this singular symbol would also reveal something of their secrets. And indeed, the dragon curls around a man's head as it emerges from its athanor, symbolizing the connection between the Templars' Baphomet, the head which symbolized the Bet Amet, or place of truth, and the illuminated astronomy. We may take this as evidence that the secret of astro-alchemy is truly displayed on the Gothic Cathedral of Notre Dame. The image of Bishop Marcel's dragon serves as a thread linking the ancient wisdom of Egypt and India in the form of Abraham with the mystery schools of Alexandria and the medieval secret societies who built the cathedrals. The thread continues down to Fulcanelli, who, knowing the secret, chose his images carefully to fill in the outline of the ancient wisdom. At first, this choice seems whimsical or even just a chaotic deluge of illusions and interconnections. Only when his pattern of selection is correctly seen as an attempt to present a specific interpretation of the Kabbalistic tree of life, suggested by the dragon's plinth, does the apparent chaos resolve into the masterly order of the Hermetic grand theme. This grand theme of 10 spheres and 22 paths is suggested by the juxtaposition of symbols from other locations, such as Amiens Cathedral and the private houses in late 15th century Bourges, and serves as a blueprint for the astro-alchemical process. Fulcanelli's system of symbolic juxtaposition reveals in ways not unlike that of surrealist art deeper meanings behind the emerging symbolic construct. It's almost as if Fulcanelli, the master symbolist artist, has inadvertently stumbled onto the magic secret of surrealism. Or more likely, surrealism is merely the latest artistic expression of a Hermetic worldview stretching back into the myths of antiquity. And so before I go on here, so the wet path is the slow method and the dry path is the fast method. And the dry path is when you know what time it is. So you can do your experiments at the right time. That way they go fast. I'm pretty sure I'm right about that. The ancient initiates who knew the secrets of the illuminated astronomy of time used myth and symbols to express their insights. This language of the gods can perhaps be read most clearly in the sky. The Villa Farnese in Caparola in Italy contains an astronomical ceiling painted by an unknown master in the late 16th century, which depicts our illuminated mythology of the heavens. The celestial sphere, we couldn't use that image, by the way. We tried to get it, but they wouldn't, the church wouldn't let us use it. The celestial sphere is unwrapped into an oval with the center at the cusp of Scorpio Sagittarius and the edges at Taurus to the right and Gemini to the far left. The oval is tilted towards the celestial pole above the north pole of the earth, so that the 2 snakes of the ecliptic zodiac and the Milky Way, as they cross at the center and the edge, are symmetrically tilted above and below the planetary equator. Draco coils around the ecliptic polar line, which unites the composition by connecting the ecliptic poles with the center of the galaxy. Thus, our unknown artist is showing us the great cross of the unmoving, showing us the great cross of the unmoving dragon axis. By the 1570s, when the ceiling was painted, the knowledge is displayed could only be discussed in an elaborate form of symbolic code, which Fulcanelli called the green language, or the language of the birds. Charles Walker, in the introduction to his oddly named book, Encyclopedia of the Occult, insists that the language of the birds is nothing less than the secret speech of the occultists. Walker's introduction is in many ways an excellent explication of the green language. It shows us how the use of symbolic language runs through the entire Western tradition and introduces us to an image from Rosicrucian alchemy, which in a veiled way demonstrates the survival of the astro-alchemical secret. 40 years after the cosmos was painted on the ceiling of the Villa Farnese, a plate published in Stefan Michaelsbacher's Kabbalah, Mirror of Art and Nature, 1616, shows how the secret is becoming more public with the Rosicrucian movement, but became more veiled with blinds and intentional obscurity. Walker's shows how the secret in becoming more public with the Rosicrucian movement had become more veiled with blinds and intentional obscurity. Walker's green language explanation of the image is valuable in its simplicity, even without directly addressing those intentional inaccuracies. It shows how, by understanding the secret language, the alchemical philosophy may be inferred, even if the details are left for the initiates to unravel. Fulcanelli, however, was a true initiate, and his insight informs Walker's demonstration, even though Walker hardly acknowledges Fulcanelli's influence. It's another example of how Fulcanelli's ideas are absorbed in an almost subliminal way without the need for personal identification. It is as if we already know that alchemy was depicted on Notre Dame and that the initiates spoke a certain secret language, and Fulcanelli is merely reminding us before we forget completely. We remember the concept, not the reminder. Another author working in the same vein is David Oveson. In his Secrets of Nostradamus, Oveson does acknowledge Fulcanelli as his source and then goes on to expand the concept in fascinating directions, using the green language to help make sense of Nostradamus's wordplay in the prophecies. He draws heavily on Fulcanelli for his understanding. Although Oveson doesn't note them, there are several odd synchronicities connecting Fulcanelli and Nostradamus. The most striking is the fact that Fulcanelli's focus on Notre Dame, the cathedral, whose name is the same as Nostradamus, the seer. The use of Our Lady is itself a green language allusion, suggesting the great goddess Isis. Oveson agrees that the language of the birds has its roots in ancient mythologies. To demonstrate this point, he presents the myth of Sigrid, Siegfried, and the dragon. By tasting the dragon's blood, Siegfried learns the language of the birds and therefore learns to control his destiny and attain his heart's desire. Quote, in the legend, Oveson tells us, we can trace the connections between initiation, legitimate growth into the higher spiritual realms, and the language of the birds. This is a language which may be heard only by the initiates, those who have clothed themselves in the skin of the dragon. This insistence on dragon initiation seems odd unless we remember the context of the illuminated astronomy, which is dragon axis anchored on the great L of Draco. Coming directly to the point, Oveson asks, quote, what is the purpose of the speech of the dragon? If it is not to allow conversing between initiates in a form which will not be understood by the uninitiated, unquote. A private language, in other words, which becomes green. Oveson suggests by the aphis of the French word ouvert, which means open, into vert or green, which therefore carries the connotations of closed or secret. Almost every commentator on Fulcanelli agrees that his explanation of the green language is the heart of mystery of the cathedrals, the concept that must be grasped in order to understand Fulcanelli's message. Language at this point is universally agreed to be few have focused on just what it is that Fulcanelli actually said about the green language and art Gothique. The first two chapters of Mystery contain Fulcanelli's personal connections interwoven with a wealth of obscure clues that only suggest some significance in retrospect. These chapters place Fulcanelli in the somewhat odd, old-fashioned, for 1926, position of a Victor Hugo romanticist longing for the good old days of the Middle Ages. Chapter 2 ends with the declaration that not only are the cathedrals books in stone, and Notre Dame in particular is the philosopher's book, but that book has secrets hidden, as Fulcanelli so eloquently says, quote, under the petrified exterior of this wondrous book of magic, unquote. So far, so good. We are firmly in the grasp of a Hugo-esque romanticism. But Fulcanelli's next paragraph marks a line in the sand across which lies the fairyland of the occult. We cross it so softly that most commentators have never even noticed it. Quote, some discerning and less superficial authors, struck by the similarity between Gothic and Goetic, have thought that there must be a close connection between Gothic art and Goetic art, i.e. magic. Goetic means magic. Leaving this tantalizing statement hanging in the ether, Fulcanelli doesn't dispute the attribution, but plunges into what, for him, is the heart of the matter. Quote, for me, Fulcanelli tells us, Gothic art Gothique, is simply a corruption of the word argotique, or it can't, or slang, which sounds exactly the same, unquote. From this, he determines that a cathedral is a work of art Goth, or of argot, i.e. cant or slang. This phonetic spoken Kabbalah is the same as the punning slang language to all languages and used by all outsiders to mask their communication from the others. Again, so far so good. Fulcanelli is on solid literary and linguistic footing with this supposition. But his next sentence, which gives us an example of how this can't work, Fulcanelli points to the core of the mystery. Quote, the argoteurs, those who use this language, are the Hermetic descendants of the Argonauts, which manned the ship Argo. They spoke the language Argotique, our lang vert, green language or slang, while they were sailing towards the fallacious shores of Colchos to win the famous Golden Fleece. Fulcanelli then adds a common expression current in Paris in the 1920s about the intelligence and the use of slang, and continues, quote, all the initiates express themselves in cant, the vagrants of the court of miracles, headed by the poet Villon, as well as the Freemasons of the Middle Ages, members of the Lodge of God, unquote, who built the argotique masterpieces, which we still admire today. These constructional sailors, nauts, also knew the route to the Garden of Hesperides. He then adds a paragraph about how only outsiders use and understand Kant in our day, in which he takes a swipe at the current nobility and ends the paragraph with the observation that an art god is really the art of light. He follows this with a long paragraph of Gnostic philosophy before finally returning to his theme of the secret language. Here he labels it the language of the birds, quote, parent and doyen of all other languages, the one spoken by philosophers and diplomats, unquote. Fulcanelli continues that this was the language which Jesus revealed to his apostles by sending them his spirit, the Holy Ghost. Fulcanelli declares, this is the language which teaches the mystery of things and unveils the most hidden truths. Immediately on the heels of this revelation comes two sentences linking the whole concept with the Inca. Quote, the ancient Inca called it the court language because it was used by diplomats. To them, it was called the double science, sacred and profane, unquote. He then goes on to place the language with its medieval equivalents, the gay science or the gay knowledge. And that's not gay like we use it today. The language of the gods and a reference to rebellious before assuring us that it was the language spoken before the fall of the Tower of Babel. He ends the paragraph by noting that apart from the principles of cant or slang, traces of the green language can be found in the dialects of Picardy and Provence and, quote, in the language of the gypsies, unquote. He then ends the chapter with one more classical allusion, that of Tiresias, who gained his knowledge of the language of the birds from Minerva Athena and shared it with ancient philosophers, Thales, Melampus, and Apollonius of Tyana. What are we to make of this? If it contains the key to any understanding, then we must make an effort to grasp what Fulcanelli is telling us. He starts by saying that this punning slang is Kabbalistic, that is, the pattern of symbolic significance. He then adds that it is also magical, goetic art. He emphasizes the phonetic connection to argot, cant, or slang, and then links it to the Argonauts on their quest for the Golden Fleece. By insisting that the green language was spoken by the crew of the Argo as it sailed toward the felicitous shores of Colchos. He suggests that the language of this quest is the foundation of all initiation. Quote, all initiates express themselves in cant, unquote. In the same sentence, he links this idea with the court of miracles of the troubadour poet Villon and the artists who built the cathedrals, implying that these groups were somehow the same nauts or sailors as the Argonauts. By any standard of comparison, this is an unusual collection of allusions and assertions, even for a Hermetic author. Fulcanelli seems to be telling us plainly as possible that the medium is the message. The argot is the art of light, the core of Gnostic philosophy, expounded so eloquently by Fulcanelli in the paragraph which follows immediately after the art of light statement. Quote, language, Fulcanelli tells us in this passage, the instrument of the spirit has a life of its own, even though it is only a reflection of the universal idea, unquote. This Gnostic metalinguistic mysticism is the core not only of alchemy, but of illumination itself. Fulcanelli understood this, and he shows when he states that argot, the initiation of the Argonauts, is but, quote, one of the forms derived from the language of the birds. This language, Fulcanelli insists, is the common language of initiation and illumination behind cultural expressions as different as the Christians, the Inca, the medieval troubadours, and the ancient Greeks. And traces of it can be found in the dialects of Picardy and Provence. And most important of all, it is the language of the gypsies. We are left stunned, convinced that Fulcanelli has just told us that the Western Kabbalah used by the troubadours and the builders of the cathedrals is based on the language of the Argonauts and the quest for the Golden Fleece, which in turn is but one application of a vast language of symbols that unite the global cultures of mankind, from the Inca to the ancient Greeks. And to top it off, he told us that traces of it can be found in the language of the gypsies, a fairly obvious reference to the tarot, long held to be a gypsy invention. However, our understanding is not in error. In fact, it might just be the best interpretation possible for this pivotal chapter in Mystery of the Cathedrals. Fulcanelli, at the very beginning of his masterpiece, has told the careful reader the key to the mysteries left to unfold. The idea of a secret language or code is easy to see in all Hermetic works, but we risk missing the key point. The Argonauts, whose astral vessel cruises the southern boundary of the night sky, and whose leader, Jason, is another dragon slayer, if we do not read Fulcanelli carefully. It is only towards the end of Mystery of Cathedrals that Fulcanelli explains his insistence on the legend of Jason and the Golden Fleece. In very guarded and obscure language, Fulcanelli informs us the secret lies in the conjunction of an oak tree, a dragon, and the golden fleece, the process of alchemical transformation. In this symbolic triangulation, we can find the remnants of our ancient astronomy. The careful reader, however, will have discerned from all of this that the images in the book should be arranged according to a base symbolic or Kabbalistic pattern, the tree of life, that Fulcanelli himself points to in his description of the dragon's plinth on the porch of St. Anne. This is, in fact, the simple secret that unlocks the mystery that Fulcanelli is attempting to elucidate. All right, that's the end of that. So at the time that we wrote this, which is over 20 years ago, I learned a lot. I don't agree with everything in this book nowadays. So far, I've agreed with almost everything, but we hadn't done a lot of I did a lot of research since the book was written, and it's very important to understand Jason and the Golden Fleece, and it's also important to understand the oak tree, the dragon, and the Golden Fleece that Fulcanelli mentions. So the oak tree is, of course, the tree that mistletoe grows on. The mistletoe that gives you long life. Okay. Also the black water is inside the oak tree. And Fulcanelli talks a lot about how you have to find out what the black water is. So, so the dragon is knowing your time, your dragon axis, your cube of space. Where are you in time? That armillary sphere I showed you. Where are you in time? And you have to do it at the right time. You have to get the mistletoe at the right time. You have to know the right time. But there's also another kind of alchemy. Mistletoe is one kind of alchemy. There's hundreds of kinds of alchemy. But there's another really important kind of alchemy. And what they would do is you would take a sheep's, the fleece of a sheep, and you would hang it in the branches of a tree in the early evening, and you go to bed. And in the morning, if you live in a place, I wouldn't happen here because we're got like 8% humidity here, but in most places you could, I'm sweating. You hang it in the branches of a tree, and as the dew comes down, it collects into the fleece, and then you get another person, and you both squeeze the fleece into a bucket, so the dew goes into a bucket, and then you consume the dew. We got to never let the dew hit the ground. That's the important part. That cancels it out. It shorts out the charge, so it can never hit the ground. You can't put it in anything metal. So you need to have something like glass. This is a perfect thing to use. And so that was, and so as the dew comes down through the air, it's collecting the charge, and then it goes into the fleece, and the fleece, is now turned gold. Now you have gold. This dew is gold, and you drink it, and it has these amazing healing magical effects. So the oak tree could be the tree. It doesn't matter what tree you put the fleece in, but that's what I now believe Fulcanelli is saying by the oak tree, the dragon, and the golden fleece, why they are so important in alchemy. So anyway, also, was there something else I wanted to say? Yeah, something I said earlier. Hang on, let me just check through here. Let me see if I don't miss it. Oh, well, I can't remember. Anyway, that's it. Thanks for watching. I'm Jay Widener's Reality Check. Tell your friends, learn alchemy, do good. Thanks.